Hello everyone, welcome back to another one of our Through the Bible studies. Today we'll be summarizing the book of Proverbs. Now I say summarize cautiously because my goal here isn't to substitute personal Bible study, but rather equip you for your own. I want you to take this information and bring it with you into the book of Proverbs, not listen to this and say, I guess I've read the book of Proverbs now. What I'm going to do is just tell you the 4 different types of Proverbs that you'll run into in the book, and as well the focus and theme that you should take to the book as a whole. Starting with who wrote the book of Proverbs, it's actually, as far as the majority is concerned, was written by a man named Solomon, who was the biological son of King David, and was, according to the book of 1 Kings, and is well verified by his life historically, given supernatural wisdom. And wisdom, by the way, is not just knowing stuff. That's knowledge. Wisdom is the ability to know what to do with what you know. But he wasn't the only one. He wasn't the only smart cookie on the block, especially one that would be noted as divinely inspired. There was also King Agur, who wrote Proverbs chapter 30, King Lemuel, who some people think is Solomon, but because we can't be sure, we won't assume. We'll just say it says it was written by Lemuel, so let's just take it at that. And as well, Lemuel's mother also concludes the book of Proverbs for us at the concluding verses of Proverbs 31. I think that's worth noting. When was this written? It was ultimately and firstly introduced in the 9th century BC. That's 900 years before Christ, which would be 2,900 years ago. But it's also important to note historically that Proverbs chapters 25 through 29, those collections of Proverbs, were actually collected by a man named Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, from the book of 2 Kings, and he was around in the 6th century BC. So we'll give full credit to where it was due. The book was completed as we know it today in the 6th century, and once again reintroduced to Israel by Ezra in the 5th century. Where did this take place? The nation of Israel. But what is this book about? Well, once again, I'll just read it to you. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 2 through 7. This is how the book opens. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb, a wise saying, and an enigma, a mysterious saying. The words of the wise and their riddles. Now catch this. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now in this we essentially get the overlying theme, and we'll repeat this at the end of the study as well. But what is the book of Proverbs all about? It's to teach us the fear of the Lord. Now we think fear and automatically think it means intimidation. I'm scared of God. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. If I fear something in the way Solomon's talking about, I'm talking about the kind of fear that I say would give to a parent, to a friend, to a figure of authority. Sure, there are in some cases I may be intimidated of them, but a fear of them is literally in this sense talking about a reverence, a respect, a value of who and what someone is to you. If I say, talking to my parents, and I want to say words that I'll regret later, but out of respect for them, I don't say those words because I don't want to A, damage my relationship, but also B, not damage myself in the process by tarnishing my reputation and getting discipline that I've learned will result from saying those sorts of words. I'm fearing my parents, not just my consequences, but also who they are. I recognize they know more than I do. And if I speak to them in this way, it will degrade that relationship and cut me off from a valuable relationship. In the same way, we're supposed to look at God like that. I don't want to do the things that break his heart. Therefore, I recognize his commandments as true. And that relationship with God, that practical application to the commands of God, are what we read in the book of Proverbs. It's actually been said often by my own biological father. He said, if you're ever wondering what God's will for you to do in your life is, just go through the book of Proverbs, start chapter 1, read on, And if you don't reach a place where this directly applies to your life situation and circumstances within 15 minutes, you get your money back. That's something that I think you can take home. How did Solomon write these things? Well, he wrote thousands of them. These several hundred were those that were recognized and tested according to divine inspiration, which we talked about in the book of Psalms. Just as a summary, for those of you that didn't go through the book of Psalms with us, understand that the book of the Old Testament, the collection, of, if you will, of these 39 books were held to an extremely stringent standard that was first laid on by when Israel saw God speak to them firsthand. And it was from those standards, from that authority, that they tested everything else. And that was it from someone who could not only claim, but be tested according to God's standards that he directly enunciated to the people of Israel were speaking from him. Does he get his facts straight? Or is he just outright false? Obviously, that would be discarded then, because God doesn't get his facts wrong. Then, likewise, does it have miracles to support it up? Does this have a tangible impact as far as God's involvement in your life? And all of these would fall under that test, of course, and of which would also be in falling in line with God's character. It's not going to say a wise saying that will ultimately destroy you. It's giving you the sound ability to, as the passage says, know what to do with what you know, to know wisdom and knowledge. And that's ultimately the point that's being made there. But understand as well, according to 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 32, Solomon wrote over 3,000 proverbs in his lifetime. These are just a collection of several hundred. If you want to know what the rest of them were, feel free to do a little historical digging, but understand these are the ones that are relevant to our relationship with God and what is made the point and focus here as far as our relationship with Jesus and his creation. So what types of Proverbs will we be reading when we go through the book of Proverbs? I'll give you 4. The first type of proverb that you're going to want to watch out for in reading this book so you don't get tripped up by the phrasing and the presentation of these things is not sandblasting, but rather a couplet. A couplet means 2 lines of a verse, something that's joined by theme or by rhyme. Now, it's important to note that the English language is the only language ever that uses poetry and categorizes it based on sound. You know, we think that as long as something, goes to that little tone, this sounds like this, sounds like this, sounds like this, that's just an English thing. What the Hebrews would do when they were writing poetry is they wouldn't do sounds, but they would do themes. And that's why these things aren't really sing-song and rhymey. They're actually meant to be stuff that you'd think about, something that you would compare. And the best example of this, and the one that Solomon uses most often, is the comparison from the lesser to the greater. There's also comparisons from worst to the worst. Making that emphasis and point. It's just saying this is a bad situation altogether. But, for example, in Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 6, we see a comparison of the lesser, the fool, to the greater, the wise. A wise man fears and departs from evil, but a fool rages and is self-confident. You can obviously see the point that's being made there. A wise man, right, he sees something bad and is like, I'd just rather not. But a fool says, I can handle it, right? How dare you say I'm so weak? So this point's being made there. Likewise, a good example that you'll see most often in the book of Proverbs is a comparison between the righteous and the wicked. Proverbs 12, verse 10, a righteous man, once again, a righteous man regards the life of his animal. Right? But the tender mercies, someone who's trying to act nice, of the wicked are cruel. So here's an example of the way that we treat God's creation. It will be reflected. A good man regards the life of everything God's created, even the animals. But a wicked man, if he's cruel to animals, he'll be cruel to everything. Even when he's trying to be nice, he'll be mean. Right? He'll come off as that. But obviously, it's not just limited to animals, it's also to people. Proverbs 12 and verse 26, same chapter, makes a point in saying that the righteous, right, good, the righteous, the greater, should choose his friends carefully. For the way of the wicked leads them astray. So you got two groups of people, someone who chooses their friends wisely and someone who just surrounds themselves with people that are fun. You surround yourself with wicked people, they'll lead you astray. You surround yourself with righteous people, you're righteous too. You're choosing them carefully. It's like what Craig Groeschel said in his book Alter Ego. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. That's the point being made here. The second type of proverb you'll run into in the book of Proverbs is personification, which means giving non-human objects or concepts human characteristics. For example, wisdom is personified in Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 13. It says, "Happy is the man who finds wisdom." Okay, wisdom, the ability to make good decisions with what you know, right? And the man who gains understanding. For her proceeds are better than the profits of silver, and her gain than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things you may desire cannot compare with her. Length of days is in her right hand, and in her left hand riches and honor. Her ways are the ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who retain her. So what is this? Is it saying that wisdom isn't a concept? It's like this girl that's attractive and has food and money and will make you feel good, right? No, it's making wisdom out to be the most appealing thing to a Hebrew boy that would be hearing this. It's just like, what's wisdom? Why should I want to hang around with it? Okay, wisdom's like a girl, a pretty girl who's got lots of money and it's got food. Right? It's like, what about the Hebrew girls? Okay, think Fabio with a six-pack and fantastic hair. Use your imagination. But and he's, well, I guess it wouldn't be much different. He's got food and money and all the things that we're interested in. It's got a lot to offer you. So that's the point that's being made in personification. It attributes non-human things with human traits so that you understand them better. But following up with this, another type of proverb that you'll run into is a parable. And Jesus used these to teach in his time as well. A parable is a story that is used to illustrate a specific point that we wouldn't normally understand with familiar material. For example, Jesus was speaking to Galileans in the first century and under occupation of Rome. They were mostly farmers, so what did he oftentimes reference? He says, the word of God's like a seed. You plant it in the ground, sometimes it lands on dry ground, sometimes good ground, sometimes just rocks, and sometimes the thin ground, but doesn't really go that deep. Right? They would follow and track with that. Well, a parable that Solomon gives, and I don't have time to read this to you, but I encourage you to read on your own time, Proverbs chapter 7, verses 6 through 27, where he gives a parable about temptation. Where in this story, Solomon watches this guy, walk home from work, and he calls him a fool because he's going down that shady part of the neighborhood, so to speak, and he knows that there's someone waiting for him there. He's setting himself up to get in trouble. And this girl comes out, who's supposed to personify this role of temptation, but not necessarily because it's playing this larger story. She's dressed immodestly, to say the least. And you could probably imagine you know what this means. She's very loud, very demanding of your attention, but it's also important to note, she comforts him. She makes him feel important. She says, oh, don't worry about the consequences. My husband, he's off on a trip. He brought money with him, okay? He's going to be gone for a while. I've got Egyptian cotton. I've got tapestries. Let's just fill ourselves with love. And I think you understand what she's trying to propose him to do. But you understand, what is temptation? It's ultimately just this attractive thing that makes you feel special, that comforts you from the consequences, that makes you feel comfortable without understanding the ultimate intention is to destroy you. And Solomon uses some very graphic language to describe that. It says, immediately he went into her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till an arrow struck his liver. As a bird hastens to the snare, he did not know it would cost him his life. So understand that. This story classic story that we'd see on TV all the time is this dumb kid that walks home on the shady side of town and gets caught up in adultery. And then all of a sudden, she plays that little song and dance from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Come a little closer, you're my kind of man, so big and so strong. I won't do that again, I promise. But basically he's saying, look, Yondu's arrow is going to go not through your chest, Drax, but right through your spleen, your liver, something you can't live without. This is a fatal injury. You're not going to walk away from that. I won't make reference to Yondu's death, spoiler alert, but you understand the point that's being made here. Referencing Guardians of the Galaxy in the book of Proverbs, that's fun. The last type of proverb that you'll run into in the book of Proverbs is a theodicy. That's a big word, but basically it means explaining the actions and nature of God from a human perspective. Naturally, it's always going to end up falling short, but based on and compared to things we're familiar with, it would be a type of personification, but it's different in saying, okay, this is what God did, this is what we're familiar with, so how do we make an effort to compare the two? And for example, in the topic of God's omniscience or omnipresence, omni meaning total or all, and presence being where you are or where you are present. And omniscience would be something that you observe, being able to know everything, like sentience. That's what that's being referred to there. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 3 is an example of a theodicy. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. Does that mean that the universe is entirely composed of God's eyeballs? No, that's not the point being made there. Humans use eyes to see. So in this theodicy, we're being told that based on God's ability to know everything and be everywhere, we would compare that to our eyes. The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, looking on the evil and the good. He knows everything, and he's everywhere. You can't hide from him, nor can you keep secrets from him. And the Psalms also affirm this as well. But you're understanding the point that's being made there. God knows and sees everything, so his eyes are everywhere. This is a theodicy, not saying his eyeballs are literally what makes up the universe. It's saying God has these traits, and he uses a human term to describe them. But understand once again, what is the focus of all of these proverbs? You're going to run into these personifications, these couplets, these parables, and these theodicies. But what do we need to keep in mind the entire time? The goal is to not only create a fear of the Lord, but by extension as well, I'll read it to you. Proverbs 3, 5 through 7. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall make your paths straight. When we're talking about God, when we're reading the Bible and understanding why do we need to know about such and such a person in history whose parents were so-and-so and he begot so-and-so and how many kids this king had, so on and so forth, do you understand you're reading about a nation who is a living example in history of God's direct involvement and their choices to either promote or limit how much he could and wanted to bless them? When we're talking about our relationship with God, understand he wants to bless you. He can bless you, but he's a gentleman. He won't force himself upon you. And just like with salvation, now speaking to my fellow Christians, understand if you want God to bless you, then start to listen to what he says. The book of Proverbs not only includes this, but the life of Jesus exemplifies this. When we learn to fear the Lord, we're looking at a life that is the Lord's. And when we trust the Lord, it naturally goes that we won't have to call into question whether his intentions for us are pure or not. So keep that in mind as you're reading this book of wisdom and recognize the value that is being put here. Because when you understand these things are a little bit more straightforward than we realize, you can take away some real gems, even if it's just one a day. Thank you for your time and listening to this study. If you have sincere questions, ask them. If you'd like to encourage the ministry, do so. But most importantly, if you know someone who could use a little wisdom in their life, and this would be a good Kickstarter to whetting their appetite as far as what the book of Proverbs is all about, Please share this study with anyone you feel would be blessed by it. Thank you for your time in listening to this study. And remember that Jesus loves you and that the fear of the Lord doesn't mean to be scared of him. It means to know him well enough that you don't want to go where he isn't, where he's warning you not to go. And he makes these warnings not because he wants to keep you from fun, but he wants to keep you close, where you'll have the most fun.